Hiya, homies! Anybody out there? Callan Hawkins, whoop, let's go! How you doing? Welcome to the first ever homie hangout. We're hanging out in the mall today. Anybody else out there? Alright, Facebook user, you're gonna have to say your name, because all I see is hi. On my end, you're probably in the homie group. Cartoon Commotion Homies. Hiya, John Ellis, the king of the commotion comment section on Facebook. So glad to see you here and on YouTube. Callan Hawkins says, I used to love them all. Don't we all love them all? You gotta love them all. Alright, guys, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here, homies. We're gonna be hanging out and talking about Garfield, the first ever Garfield special from 1982. That's Here Comes Garfield, and we're gonna chat about the episode that aired earlier today. So I'm actually gonna mute myself, and we're gonna watch the episode together. Hopefully Facebook doesn't flag this video as like copyright or something. And let me know if you can hear it in the comments, okay, guys? Because like I'm having some audio issues on my end, but you know, the mall, terrible connection over here. We're gonna see how this works. I'm gonna mute myself, and we're gonna watch the video, and then we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about Garfield and Garfield specials and all of that. So thank you for hanging out with us, and here we go. Garfield's usually a major laugh riot. A real knee slapper, if you know what I mean. But Garfield's early specials were pretty loaded with a mondo dose of drama. How could these get everyone on the bodacious Garfield bandwagon in the 1980s? Let's rewind, relive, and reflect with Garfield right after this killer track.
Let's go back in time, we can just hit rewind. What a terrific notion, it's cartoon commotion.
Homie, we're back with more radical cartoon insights. My name's Cade, your favorite cartoon weirdo, and of course you know my co-host and banjo-playing pet pig, Jiggy. Would you believe that there was a time when Garfield was all about the drama? Well, if you were around in 1982, you might have been hyped to check out Garfield's first ever TV special. Before the cartoon had a series, before the cat ever reached his first seasons, this cat had to make a major debut on the tube. Premiering on October 25th of 1982, Here Comes Garfield was a made-for-TV special produced by the same people who made those wonderful Peanuts specials, Mendelsohn and Melendez. Directed by Phil Roman and written by Jim Davis. From here on, Garfield had like 12 total specials, with only a handful of those being focused on holidays. What Jiggy and I found most radically fascinating about these early specials were the major levels of drama that they tossed our way. It was a mix most unexpected in retrospect. The tone, the vibe, it was all pretty dramatic. It's 1982, October 25th on CBS. Ironically, it's a Monday. Everybody already knows straight up that Garfield hates Mondays cause, well, Mondays. And it's not really a very good day for Garfield and Odie in general, but we don't know that just yet. It's 8:30 p.m. and America's tuning in to see their favorite comic strip cat animated in his very own cartoon special. This could potentially cement our love for the selfish and lazy cat, but how? Exactamundo, Jiggy Bud. It broke our scope of the cat's personality. It played our hearts like a little violin. Its funky, fresh soul soundtrack had a beat that could make you fall in love with the worst of characters. And And on the very top of all of that, it made us see that under that flabby fur, there beats a heart of gold. Hey Jig, remember how we spoke about redemption arcs in our Skeleton Warriors episode? Right, Rooney. This is totally another redemption arc, but instead of someone that did something majorly bogus, and then, much later being forgiven, it's all about showing a side of Garfield's character that wouldn't naturally be what people see up front. A redemption arc for us to care about Garfield beyond his sarcastic personality. It's very easy to view this cat as a lazy jerk that gets whatever he wants handed to him, but that's a sad stereotype that doesn't lean into his lovable side. In this first story, Garfield and Odie are made to play outside together by John, and they seriously do actually play together. Garfield isn't tormenting Odie all that much in this, he's sorta just being a troublemaker in the hood, and Odie's playing right along with him. This is very interesting to me because the trope Garfield tunes usually come back to, way too often even, is just Garfield messing around and hurting Odie somehow, which is a staple for Garfield's comedy, but it's not the root of the comedy. I think that in this first special, it was important for them to be seen as a family. The ending totally sells that vibe, it lands, and it's dope. This relationship he has with Odie reminds me of something Garfield tells us, the viewers, in the Halloween special. He turns to us to break that good old ever-questionable fourth wall, and he says,
just between you and me, there are times when I love that dog.
So I believe this was our emotional connection to Garfield early on, because otherwise he had a pile of negative attributes, and we could have clung to those. Nuh-uh, for sure, Jiggy. If anyone says they dislike Garfield for any of those reasons, it's just because they haven't gotten to know him very well. Something interesting is that the early specials hardly led with comedy at all. It's just my personal take, but I laughed way more at the 1988 cartoon than I did watching these. And that's not such a bad thing. This was very intentional. This wasn't supposed to be a hilarious production. It was supposed to connect with us emotionally first. I mean, this first story didn't wrap up all rainbows and unicorns in Garfield's hood, The plot was all about Odie getting nabbed up by the pound, and then Garfield having a major change of heart in an effort to go and get him back. Does that sound familiar, homie? Yeah, Jiggy, you are so right. That's exactly what I was hinting at. It's almost the very same word-for-word plot of the first live-action Garfield movie. Oh, there are so many reasons that I dislike those live-action films today, but we're not gonna go into that, because we'd be here for a while and we've got more specific points to get to. Okay, so at first Garfield had zero plans of rescuing Odie from the pound. After a Mondo Ultra Lazy Gorge Fest, Garfield becomes bored and actually decides to go and break Odie out of the city pound. Probably should have came to that conclusion sooner there, Garf. But he's Garfield and it took him a while to have a conscience. Unfortunately, he too got tossed in that icebox, without any clue as to how they were gonna get out. That's when he heard from another cat in the joint. Odie was gonna get on the chopping block come dawn. This was so totally unexpected how heartwarming and sad this became. This is when he thinks nostalgically back to his childhood days as a kitten and when Odie was a puppy. And they were actually pretty close friends back then too. Jiggy, that is so on point! Garfield totally stepped up to rescue his adopted brother from a possible demise. This was a nerve-shocking way to bring us into Garfield's world. And that's why it works so radically well. At this point of the story, we're not to think of Garfield as a truly selfish cat anymore. See, it's been revealed to us that underneath all of that flabby fur, he loves his family, and he would chance his own well-being for them. Garfield actually does play a huge part in rescuing Odie from the pound, too. There's a whole prison break scene where G-Cat bites the arm of a guard and the crew goes free like a stampede of wild cattle. It was fantastic. That's the main thing here. We probably never would have given a care to Garfield in his world if Garfield hadn't started out as an unlikely hero. This sucked us into the lovable and relatable world of Garfield from the 80s onward.
If you enjoyed the show, the only way it grows is if you share it with a homie, so they can know. Come join the commotion, cartoon commotion. Come join the commotion.
Alrighty, we're gonna end it right there because you know the rest of that song. We're hanging out talking about Garfield, not Garfield and Friends, but Here Comes Garfield from 1982. And this is an episode I had earlier today, and I'm gonna start doing this where we have homie hangouts, and the episode airs earlier in the day, and then we just we hang out afterwards and we just talk about it like that. So anybody here live? We got Callie Hawkins asking a question. Where did Jim Davis come up with John's name? You know what? Actually, a friend of mine told me about that earlier today. We were talking, and they said it was a 1950s coffee commercial, if I'm not mistaken. He got the name from that. It was like John Arbuckle was the guy in the coffee commercial. Oh, Matthew Carter's here live. How you doing, Matthew Carter? Hiya. Hey, Cartoon Commotion, I've watched the Garfield Christmas show and Garfield in the Rough. I've also watched Garfield movie trailer. I look forward to watching it. It'll be fun. All good for you, man. John Ellis says, hiya, John. Hiya. Welcome back. I recall Jim stated John Arbuckle was a name he made up as an authority to cite on his papers in school. Interesting. Well, there actually is a John Arbuckle coffee commercial, though, John. I saw it out there earlier today. So it does exist. But, besides that, I have quite a few tidbits of trivia for you that I was digging into last night for this special conversation here. Conversation on specials. There was a ton of stuff that I cut from this episode of Cartoon Commotion so that we could just focus in on the first Garfield special. I will gladly take any questions and answer them as best as I possibly can. But, if you don't have any questions, I have some trivia for you. So, Jim Davis first published Garfield in newspapers on June 19th, 1978. And this first Garfield special aired on October 25th, 1982. Garfield was named after Jim Davis's grandfather, James Garfield Davis. This was written in the collected Garfield comic complete books, as well as online and news publications. So that's neat. I thought you guys might like to know that, and we can throw back to some of these if anybody comes in with some questions. All right. The series Garfield and Friends premiered on September 17th, 1988. So September 17th is the anniversary for that one. Now, one bit of trivia I was just dying to know was, how did Lorenzo Music get the role of Garfield on Garfield and Friends, on Here Comes Garfield, anything? Lorenzo Music, his wife Henrietta Music, said that Lorenzo got the role of Garfield in his audition after Jim Davis interviewed hundreds of voices. And now this can be found on a one-off podcast interview, and I think it's from a podcast called The Stolen Dress or something like that. I really had to dig for this information, homies. So his whole family was involved in his voice acting career. They helped him make his audition tape and send it out to everyone. And it even became the gold standard for voice actors for a long time. So he was sent by, I believe, his agent to Jim Davis to audition for Garfield. In Ohio, he was looking for the Garfield specials, and they were auditioning for like 3 days. When he heard Lorenzo and he said, now this is Jim Davis, he's just like, that's it. And she said that, Henrietta said that Jim Davis realized that he had been writing Garfield for years with the voice of Carlton the Doorman from the 1974 series Rhonda, who was voiced off screen by Lorenzo Music. I listened to this podcast, and I gotta say, that was brilliant. That was brilliant information. So, like, if you're hearing it now for the first time, there you go. That's the story. Another bit of trivia is that it seems that many people over the years have asked if John Arbuckle can actually understand Garfield. There's literally over a dozen articles on this subject when I was doing research last night and all this past week, which I think is really interesting because apparently this is a topic that the peeps want answered. In June of 2004, however, Jim Davis had an interview with it's like blackfilm.com. That's how I would write it. Not, I was gonna say like the black, but I think it's just blackfilm.com. And he answered this question saying, I think people honestly feel that cats think in English, that cats understand everything as they do, but obviously they don't talk, so I wanted to ride that line between here's what your cat is really thinking to give pet owners insight into what their pets are really thinking about without giving it away, to have him really talk and John understand him. That would have made it more of a fantasy. And you'll notice that when John understands what Garfield is saying, it's something Garfield does with an action, not a word that communicates it. So the answer, according to Jim, no, not John. John cannot actually understand what Garfield is saying, and I think this understanding John has of Garfield comes from getting to know his personality enough to sort of guess what it is that he's thinking. We got another comment. Matthew Carter asks, have you watched the live-action Garfield movies? Yes. John Ellis says, the 10th anniversary special never showed Lorenzo except from behind. That sort of frustrated me. The 10th anniversary special never showed Lorenzo except from behind. Are we talking about... What are we talking about here, John? Are we talking about the Rhonda show? Because he never got on screen at all in that, as far as I could tell. All right, so if any other questions coming in, I would be glad to take them up here and chat. Matthew Carter, in a more detailed explanation, yes, I've seen the live-action Garfield movies, but as I said in my video, I'm just not a fan of those for many reasons. And actually, I did make a note of that I thought I would mention why I'm not exactly a fan. So I said that I greatly disliked the live-action Garfield movies, but the main reason that I dislike them is because Bill Murray never should have been allowed near that role. While he's an excellent Ghostbuster, he's the reason that Lorenzo Music was booted from the real Ghostbuster series during the Q5 debacle that they endured. His reason that he didn't want Lorenzo voicing his character, Peter Venkman, was because he was the voice of Garfield. This has been noted both in general online and as well as from, I believe it was Maurice LaMarche, the voice of Egon Spengler, on podcasts that I've listened to personally. One of them in particular, I believe, was the Saturday Morning Rewind podcast, though I haven't heard that in a long time, but it's just like, piece this together for me. If he's responsible for Peter Venkman no longer being the voice, Lorenzo Music no longer voicing Peter Venkman because he's Garfield, and then he takes on the role of Garfield in the live-action movies, that's just hypocritical. I think it's very hypocritical. John Ellis says they showed him recording for the Saturday morning show on the Garfield 10th birthday. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, now I know what you're talking about. The 10th Garfield birthday special, but the camera only filmed him from back. Callie Hawkins asks, is Jiggy in the mall with me? No, Jiggy is not here right now. He stayed home. He's actually preparing for next week. We're taking notes on Garfield and Friends for an episode on John Arbuckle. We're going to focus entirely on that next week. Sorry, folks. If you came here for Jiggy, he's at home right now, but he will be with me next week. Our pal John Ellis, as we were just talking about, the king of the cartoon commotion comment section on Facebook, mentioned to us that Garfield's first ever TV appearance was on a made-for-TV movie called, I think it was Fantastic Funnies. Is that right, John? So that's true. That's on YouTube if you want to check that out. But it does not feature Lorenzo as the voice of Garfield. With him being the definitive Garfield now, I promise you that this is a little jarring, to say the least. It's sort of strangely wrong. That doesn't mean it's terrible, though. It was fun to see him animated for the first time. Oh, Sherry Edgen says, no, Jiggy, maybe I will look in the pre Black Friday ads. Nah, I'm just kidding. Yeah, sorry, he just didn't want to leave the house. He was glued to the TV. He was watching Garfield and Friends for our video next week. So, Garfield Gets a Life. Speaking of the next video that we're going to put out, the next episode we're going to put out next week, Garfield Gets a Life is the special that we're going to focus on in our upcoming bonus episode of Cartoon Commotion. So this is actually not that episode. It's going to be a bonus episode. It spins off from there. As we were taking notes for our next Garfield episode, Saturday, 6 p.m., Jiggy pointed out to me that it could be like 2 episodes instead of just 1. So I was like, sure, let's do another bonus episode. And so now Garfield's going to get like a ton of content from here at Cartoon Commotion. So, oh, we got another comment. Matthew Carter says, if you watch Zombieland, oh, you said a lot, Matthew. Just, if you watch Zombieland 1, Abigail Breslin asks Bill Murray if he has any regrets in his career, and he says Garfield maybe. Also, I've watched the Garfield and Friends episode Nighty Nightmare, where Garfield has a nightmare where he turns King Kong size. Yes, that was an episode where John said that he would have a nightmare if he ate too much food before bed, and he was just like, no, that's not even possible, and then he went to bed. That happened like on 2 occasions with completely different situations, but they really love their dream sequences in this show. I am convinced that dream sequences pretty much became a thing because of Garfield and Friends. John Ellis says, yes, Lonnie Anderson hosted it. Sort of shows how fast the strip got popular, as Garfield had only been around for 2 years by that point. That is so true. So what he was saying is Lonnie Anderson hosted that Fantastic Funny special, and that is available on YouTube. Do you remember Garfield on the Town, guys? Homies, do you remember Garfield on the Town? Did you think that the realization of Garfield's mother was all that monumental? Monumental, see what I did there? That's a question you guys can answer in the comments section. Did you think that, you know, Garfield meeting his mother for the first time was all that monumental? I'm gonna keep saying it like that. The soundtrack to Here Comes Garfield is really the background superstar of this special, I think. We could all agree on that pretty much. Lou Rawls was the singer that literally made this adventure sing. Our homie with the inside scoop on this soundtrack, Michael Perrone, convinced us to pick up the album on vinyl. And that was an excellent record. If you didn't know, it also has dialogue from the special and original dialogue between tracks, with some tracks not even heard in the special. Desiree Goyette got her start with this album. She literally got her career started with this album, and I loved her track Move Me, which was not in the special at all, but it still rocks. It's totally my jam, homie. You can listen to it on YouTube Music for free if you're interested. Oh, we got more comments. Callie Hawkins says, in the 80s, I saved up to buy the comforter and sheet sets. It was so cool. Rad to the max, Callie. Matthew Carter says, I like the U.S. Acres episode where Orson the Pig imagines himself as a James Bond character called Magnum Cream Pie. Huh. Sherry Etchen says, who didn't have the Garfield sheet set in the 80s? That's a good question. Who didn't have the Garfield sheet set in the 80s? Mr. B-Man says, I wonder what gave them the idea to put a show out about farm animals with a show about domestic animals. Well, basically that comes from the fact that it was supposed to be a strip that Jim Davis was also producing. It's like in addition to Garfield, and I don't know the whole history of that, but I want to say that maybe it flopped, and so they decided to package it with this. Garfield and Friends, that is. John Ellis comes back, says, speaking of dramatic Garfield, in 1984, Jim Davis released the book His 9 Lives. One of the stories, never animated, goes way past dramatic. Yeah, I'm glad they skipped that one. I totally forgot about that. I might have to revisit this. I know that you know the 9 Lives movie happened, the special. So it'd be interesting to see what that was, like re-examine it. Matthew Carter comes back. He says, I used to have a stuffed Garfield when I was young. Bro, I still got one on my shelf right now. George Bueller says, my dad is a big fan of Garfield and has a large figurine collection. Right on, dude. Yeah, I got a couple Garfield things. I'm hoping to get some more soon, but, you know, I got this really weird Garfield piggy bank that I loaded with pennies. It was completely glass, so you couldn't see Garfield until you stuffed them full of pennies, so that's exactly what we did. George Bueller has a show, The Fanatic Forums, so if you're interested in that. He's also a part of the Cereal Box Network. Great series great collection of shows, I should say. Anybody else here? Feel free to jump on in whenever you want. The last question I had was, do you remember Garfield on the Town? And did you think that the realization of Garfield's mother was all that monumental? If you didn't know, oh, I already told you that. Hang on. We also had 2 Garfield telephones, too. That's what George says. I am hoping to grab one of those for Christmas this year. I hope that somebody got me one of those amazing telephones, because I think they are radical. So here's some ideas for some random calendar social holidays that deserve a Garfield special, in my opinion. National Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day. Though Garfield would probably take that literally, that's the whole point. That was on November 15th. What do you guys think about that? November 15th. Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day. Do you think that Garfield would have an excellent special with that? Because I think he would. Matthew Carter says, what's your opinion on the scene where Grandma Arbuckle remembers her husband in the Garfield Christmas show? You mean, yeah, the Christmas special? Heartwarming. Very heartwarming. I'm gonna have to rewind to that one again and check it out this Christmas. I'm actually planning to watch a ton of Garfield specials on Thanksgiving. Probably Garfield's Thanksgiving, obviously, Christmas special. And, any other recommendations would be welcome. John Ellis says, On the Town was based on a Christmas arc in the strip. I remember reading that arc. I didn't realize that it took place during Christmas. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. George Bueller says, was there ever a crossover with Garfield and U.S. Acres? No, not really officially. Though on the box art for the DVD sets, there is there are covers where the characters collide. But I don't think that it ever happened officially in animation. Sherry Edge says, I try to clean out my fridge every Thursday. Well, good on you. But do you think it would make an excellent Garfield special? John Ellis says, I notice Here Comes Garfield. I notice Here Comes Wisely. I'm totally butchering this comment. I noticed Here Comes Garfield wisely deleted Lyman from Odie's backstory. Yes, it totally makes sense. Lyman was such a one-off character that didn't last. Sorry, but it makes sense that he's out of the story. George Bueller says, Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day would be a 5-minute special for Garfield. Maybe even less, really, if you think about it. It might be a 30-second special. Gally Hawkins says, did the U.S. Post Office ever make Garfield stamps? I believe so. That definitely wasn't in my research. I know they made Scooby-Doo stamps. They had, probably. Mr. B-Man said, doesn't Garfield clean the fridge every night? Yeah, that's why, a special might be 30 seconds or less. George Wheeler says, Garfield Halloween special and summer special were great. All right, then I'm going to have to add those to my my Thanksgiving rewatch of the Garfield specials, probably. We'll see. I mean, I'm thinking they're each about 25 to 30 minutes, so it should be fine. I should be able to pack a few of them in. John Ellis says a stuffed Orson toy turned up in a 1990 strip just as an Easter egg. Neat. Sherry Edgin, hiya again. Garfield is such an icon. His laziness and mediocre attitude is just so funny because if you talk your cats, that's how we talk them. Yeah, you got a point there. I mean, that's exactly right. Like, all the cats in my neighborhood, I talk them all the time, and I think about it like you would Garfield. Garfield is an iconic cat voice and mindset for cats. The original Grumpy Cat, as it's written in, publications. Matthew Carter says, I like the gag where Garfield says that whoever did anything should be drug out into the street and shot. Although with today's censoring on TV shows, that gag wouldn't fly. Yes, that was done 2 times in the first season as far as I can remember. Once in the episode Garfield's Moving Experience, and then another one in the first episode, which was what was that episode called? I think it was the episode where Garfield couldn't fall asleep. Hang on. I have my notes right here. Peace and Quiet. That was the episode title. Mr. B-Man says, I always thought they made him talk with his mouth closed because it was his thoughts. It is his thoughts. It is. But see, the thing is that a lot of people were wondering, like, well, can John understand Garfield's thoughts, right? But it's so very clear, especially when Jim Davis put it into words in that interview with Black Movie, or was it blackfilm.com? Let me rewind here. Black Film. I think it was blackfilm.com. Yep, blackfilm.com. George Bueller says the Halloween special has a great Binky the Clown scene at the beginning. I remember that. I remember seeing that part, and I thought that was funny. John Ellis is back. He said, I liked all of the 80s Garfield specials except for Garfield in Paradise. The plot got a bit much. Island Elvis worshippers try to sacrifice Garfield's new girlfriend to a volcano. No, really? I forgot about that. And, I mean, there were some episodes of Garfield and Friends that could be a bit much, too. They got a little outlandish. They kind of pulled at the cartoonishness of the environment they had to work in. I was watching an episode last night I really dug. It was called Heatwave Holiday. And that was where Garfield, Odie, and John accidentally made stumbling on my words here, an authentic Christmas in July experience. Christmas in July, so Garfield's trying to beat the heat, and he pulls a fridge out of, like the cat can push a fridge. He pushes the fridge out onto the lawn, and he turns on the ice maker, and he coats the yard in snow. Very cartoonish. And shortly after, John finds out and he scolds him, but then he's like getting in on the on the whole thing, and he's like, yeah, let's think cold thoughts and have winter in July. And so Garfield takes him to the garage, points to a box on the top shelf of Christmas decorations. They decorate their house for Christmas, and sure enough, the whole neighborhood is fooled into believing that it's somehow Christmas. It's a ridiculous episode, but that's why I love it so much. It's hilarious. Highly recommend that one. John Ellis says Babes and Bullets from 1989, the special based on one of the 9 live stories, is my favorite special. Not perfect homage to film nor detective stories. Yes, that was very cool. And you know what? I might have to add that to my list for Thanksgiving also. Who knows? I might go through like the remaining, let's see, I've watched 3 specials recently. About 8 or 9 specials I have left. Matthew Carter says, how about the episode Garfield and Friends where he has a Hawaiian sickness that gets him on a talent show, but John ends up doing what he did and winning the contest? Yeah, that was, I believe, the 2nd episode. That was literally like episode 1A, if you don't count Orson's farm. Yeah, episode 1B, if you don't count Orson's farm. That's where there's a Hawaiian cat flu going around, and every time John mentions Hawaiian-related things, Garfield starts dancing. But Garfield refuses to take the medicine that, Liz prescribes, the veterinarian, and John tries to get Garfield on a TV show to capitalize on this with his wacky talents, with the possibility of winning $1,000. Then Garfield takes his meds so that he's in good health before he gets on TV, not realizing that John actually needed him to dance the hula whenever he mentioned anything Hawaiian. And, in this episode, I'm glad you mentioned this, Matthew, because this episode has one little Easter egg in it that relates to John being able to hear Garfield's thoughts. So there's a parrot that can imitate people in this, like a parrot would. Except it's Frank Welker, and he's doing impressions, and he does a perfect impression of Lorenzo Music. But see, in the context of the series, no human being can hear what Garfield is thinking. Only animals. The parrot heard his thoughts and was able to repeat them out loud. So, if you really stop and think about it for even a second, the parrot could literally tell human beings what Garfield is thinking. It could literally be his way to communicate with humans. And it's ridiculous, but it's true. He could literally do that. Well, in this episode, John actually throws away his dignity after that, and he wins the money when he dances the hula on stage. And I think that's one of two occasions where John has won $1,000. Matthew Carter also asks, what's your opinion on Frank Welker voicing Garfield? He's great. He's a great Garfield. I wish they would give him a better series, maybe something a little bit more old-fashioned, 2D animation, more authentically Garfield, but totally love his voice for Garfield. I think he nailed it. He definitely sounds a lot like Lorenzo. So the closer you can get to Lorenzo Music, the more authentic and iconic a Garfield performance you're going to have. So there's a couple other weird holidays that don't have Garfield specials. April 28th is National Superhero Day. Garfield dressed up as a superhero in episode 12, The Caped Avenger. And he could have, a special where he tries to get a comic book made after him, which is sort of what was happening in this episode, The Caped Avenger. So, what do you guys think about that? Maybe there could be a National Superhero Day Garfield special. John Ellis says, I note the 1982 special changed the context of certain strip punchlines. John's I'm so happy to own a cat in this strip is followed by I could just throw up. Okay, yeah. Well, that would be a definite change. So, April 28th is National Superhero Day. That could be a special for Garfield. August 19th is World Photo Day, and I had a pretty good idea for this one. What if Garfield could have a special where John, Odie, and him are trying to get their picture taken as a family, but everything keeps going wrong? Perhaps even Liz could get involved, Liz the vet. Now, I should also say that could potentially have already happened in Garfield and Friends. It's been a while since I watched the entirety of the series, so I could actually just be quoting an episode verbatim without realizing it. Anyone else have any desired Garfield specials? Matthew Carter says, here's somebody else that sounds like Lorenzo Music on account of working with him, Maurice LaMarche. He worked on The Real Ghostbusters with Maurice LaMarche. Hang on a second, I gotta take a drink. So, Lorenzo Music was working on The Real Ghostbusters with Maurice LaMarche, and he did a pretty great impersonation of... I haven't heard Maurice LaMarche's impersonation of Lorenzo, but I'm sure it sounded great, because Maurice LaMarche is very talented. Again, anyone else have any desired Garfield specials? If not, that's actually where we're going to wrap things up. That's all I got for you tonight in this homie hangout. And you know what? I am more than happy to come back and do this more often. Especially if more people want to show up and chat with us live. And Jiggy will be here. He wasn't here tonight, but that doesn't mean he won't be here every time. Oh, Mr. B-Man says, I just saw that Jim Davis originally intended the comic strip to focus on John. Okay, well that would make a lot of sense. Well, I don't know where did you get that information? That's interesting. John Ellis says, thanks. You're welcome. I don't know if maybe you're a little bit earlier on in the video still, John. I don't know what you're thinking, but no problem. Matthew Carter says, here's an idea for a Garfield special, a Garfield Star Wars special. What say you? Yeah, that sounds like fun. I mean, did they do a parody of that in Garfield and Friends? I feel like that's something they should have done if they hadn't done it. And a little special like that, like where there's a sort of a crossover where things happen in Star Wars style, but Garfield is like a protagonist, like maybe Garfield's Luke Skywalker. Sherry Edgen says, great job, Cartoon Commotion. Great info on Garfield. Well, thank you very much, Sherry. And like I said, Jiggy will be coming back around next week. This is not like the intended format each time. We're going to have different people on. We're going to have different discussion points and topics. It's just, this was our first time doing this live stream because I'm switching the format of the show where we go live after the fact and we have a discussion on the episode that we air earlier in the day. So that's the whole idea with this. John Ellis says, I'd love to see a Garfield special adapting the 2006 arc where John and Liz genuinely become a couple. That would be interesting. Sort of could be even like the sort of retroactive grand finale for the Garfield and Friends series. That's something that I would like to see Frank Welker come in and do. That would be awesome. All right, guys. So that's pretty much the show. If you want to go back and watch the original, the video that I had out earlier today, the episode, if you want to listen to it, it's also got an audio-only version, and it's called Garfield Got Dramatic. And the whole idea is talking about how in the 1982 introduction to Garfield, we had a very dramatic opening. And that was a good thing. More on that if you go back and watch it. So thank you so much for being here. Keep it unreal, homies.